West Dallas, spring 1926. A skinny 17-year-old kid named Clyde Barrow is pumping gas for 15 cents an hour when Sheriff Ted Hinton walks through the door looking for someone else. Clyde makes a comment, something about cops wasting time. Hinton backhands him across the face. The sheriff's badge catches sunlight, leaves a cut across Clyde's cheekbone. Blood hits the concrete. A crowd watches. Total humiliation. The sheriff laughs, tosses a nickel on the ground. "For your trouble, boy." Clyde picks it up, stares at that badge glinting in the Texas heat. 3 hours later, he goes back, steals the cash register and something else, the sheriff's spare badge from the office. That badge would stay in Clyde's pocket for 8 years, through dozens of robberies, 13 murders, 6 states. It was in his jacket when 130 bullets tore through him on a Louisiana highway in 1934. You think you know Bonnie and Clyde. You don't know where it started. The gas station sat on the edge of West Dallas, where pavement cracked into dirt roads, and hope ran out completely. Clyde Barrow worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week, hands stained black from motor oil, pockets always empty. Spring heat made the air shimmer above hot asphalt. Sheriff Ted Hinton had walked in that afternoon looking for somebody's cousin, eyes scanning faces like he owned every single one of them. When Clyde muttered something under his breath, something about cops having nothing better to do, Hinton didn't hesitate. The slap echoed across the entire lot. Badge caught the sun, that metal edge sharp enough to split skin clean open. Blood dripped onto concrete while customers watched and said absolutely nothing. The sheriff flicked a nickel onto the ground, like Clyde was a dog begging for scraps, then walked out to his cruiser. Clyde stood there, face burning, picking up that nickel with hands that shook from rage. Not fear. The badge glinted as Hinton's car pulled away, dust rising behind it. 3 hours later, after closing time, Clyde jimmied the office window, took $40 from the register, then saw the spare badge on Hinton's desk, tarnished, scratched, sitting there like it was supposed to mean something about law and order. He pocketed it, walked out into the night carrying stolen money and a stolen symbol. Pride costs more than money. Before the badge, Clyde Barrow was just another broke kid from Tellico, Texas, trying desperately not to starve. Born March 24th, 1909, to a family so poor they lived under a wagon until Clyde was 7 years old. They moved to Dallas in 1922, settled in the West Dallas slums, where cement met desperation, and stayed there. Clyde dropped out of school at 16, worked odd jobs that paid almost nothing, stole groceries when his younger siblings got hungry. Nothing violent. Nothing that made headlines or got him noticed by anyone who mattered. By 1925, he was pumping gas legally, actually trying to stay clean and build something resembling a normal life. 17 years old, 5'7", skinny as a rail, invisible to everyone. Nobody looked at him twice. Then Hinton's badge split his face open in front of everyone he knew, everyone who'd seen him trying to be legitimate. Something fundamental flipped that day. The badge went into his pocket and stayed there permanently. Never wore it, never showed it to anyone, never talked about it. Just kept it as a constant reminder of what public humiliation felt like, what powerlessness tasted like. Within a month, Clyde was robbing grocery stores after midnight. Small stuff at first. $20 here, $50 there. Police barely noticed because Dallas was full of desperate people doing desperate things. He was nobody, just another petty thief in a city overflowing with them. But the badge stayed with him, pressed against his ribs every single time he reached for a door handle or jimmied open a cash register. You don't become dangerous overnight. You get made that way, one humiliation at a time. By 1927, Clyde was 18 and escalating rapidly. The badge never left his pocket, not once. He got arrested for auto theft in late summer, did time in the Denton County Jail, came out 3 months later noticeably harder and colder. Inside, he met older criminals who taught him practical skills: how to crack safes without making noise, how to spot undercover cops by their shoes and watches, how to move fast and quiet through neighborhoods at night. They saw something in Clyde that most people missed: a sharpness, a willingness to take risks most kids his age wouldn't even consider. When he got released in early 1928, he returned to Dallas with new skills and the same old rage burning quietly inside him. The badge had become more than a souvenir. It had become a compass, pointing him toward every sheriff's office, every cop hangout, every person who reminded him even slightly of that slap. He started targeting police-adjacent robberies specifically: pawn shops owned by retired cops, diners where deputies ate lunch and felt safe, bars where off-duty officers got drunk. Nothing big enough to draw serious law enforcement heat, but personal enough to satisfy something dark steadily growing inside him. People who knew Clyde from his gas station days said he'd changed completely: quieter, more focused, more dangerous. He didn't drink much, didn't brag about scores, didn't talk about the badge or what it represented. Just carried it everywhere like other men carried crosses or lucky coins. By late 1928, he was ready for something significantly bigger than $20 grocery store scores. The things we carry choose our direction. January 1930. West Dallas again. But this time Clyde's visiting a friend's house on a cold afternoon when Bonnie Parker walks through the door. She's 19 years old, married to a man currently serving 99 years for murder, working tables at a diner downtown for tips that barely covered rent. Dark hair, sharp eyes, restless energy that matched his own perfectly. They clicked immediately. Both broke, both bored, both hungry for something more than the suffocating life they'd been handed by circumstance and bad luck. Within a week, they were inseparable, spending every free moment together. One night in February, sitting in a parked car under dim streetlights near the Trinity River, Clyde showed her the badge, told her the whole story: the gas station, the slap, the blood on concrete, the nickel tossed like he was garbage. Bonnie turned the badge over slowly in her hands, felt the scratches worn into the metal, the weight of 8 years of carried rage. "Then let's make them remember your name," she said. Not as a suggestion or a question, as a fact, as destiny. That's when the planning started in earnest. Small banks, filling stations, jewelry stores, places with cash and weak security. Bonnie had sharp ideas about timing, about escape routes, about how to vanish completely before anyone knew what happened. Clyde had the badge, the skills from jail, and 8 years of quiet, burning rage looking for direction. Together, they became something neither could have been alone. Every legend needs a witness who believes. Late 1930, a small-town bank in Henrietta, Oklahoma, population barely 3,000. Clyde and Bonnie, plus 2 recruits from West Dallas, walked in 15 minutes before closing time on a Friday. $3,000 in the vault, most of it farmers' deposits waiting for Monday. Clean, professional getaway, no shots fired, gone completely before the alarm even sounded or anyone thought to write down a license plate number. Local newspapers barely mentioned it, Just another Depression-era stick-up in a region absolutely full of them. Another story about desperate people doing desperate things to survive. But Sheriff Ted Hinton saw the report when it crossed his desk 2 days later. The method of operation matched something he vaguely remembered. A skinny kid. A gas station robbery back in 1926. Cash and a badge that went missing the same night. Hinton pulled the old file from storage, looked at the name written in faded ink. Clyde Barrow. Same kid he'd slapped 4 years ago in front of a crowd. The one who'd stolen his spare badge from the office that same night. Hinton made some calls to neighboring counties, started tracking movements, checking with other sheriff's departments about similar robberies. By early 1931, he'd confirmed his suspicion with growing certainty. That nobody gas station attendant was now hitting banks with a woman named Bonnie Parker and at least 2 other accomplices. Hinton reached out to the Texas Rangers, explained the situation. "I know this kid personally," he told them over the phone. "He's got a grudge he's been nursing for years. He's not going to stop." And just like that, the official hunt began. Clyde still carried the badge everywhere, checking his pocket before every job like a pilot checks instruments before takeoff, like a soldier checks his ammunition. He didn't know yet that Hinton was already on his trail, connecting dots, building a file. Your past always finds you, no matter how fast you run. Between 1931 and 1932, the Barrow Gang took its final shape and became genuinely dangerous. Clyde recruited his older brother Buck Barrow, plus Ray Hamilton and 17-year-old W.D. Jones, young guys with absolutely nothing to lose and everything to prove to a world that had never given them a fair chance. They hit small banks across Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri, moving fast, never staying anywhere longer than a single night, always changing cars and routes. The robberies got progressively bolder, the getaways tighter and more professional. By mid-1932, law enforcement had linked them to at least 13 murders, most of them police officers or deputies who got too close during robberies or traffic stops. The violence was escalating beyond anyone's control. The badge stayed permanently in Clyde's jacket pocket, darkening with accumulated sweat and time. He checked it constantly, obsessively, a nervous habit that Bonnie noticed but never questioned out loud. Meanwhile, Bonnie started writing poetry in stolen notebooks. The story of Bonnie and Clyde, she called it. Romantic verses about outlaws and doomed love and dying young. She sent copies to newspapers, which published them eagerly because readers couldn't get enough. Suddenly, they weren't just criminals running from the law. They were celebrities with fans and a mythology. Wanted posters went up in 6 states simultaneously. The FBI officially opened a file in Washington. J. Edgar Hoover himself took personal interest because cop killers made the Bureau look weak. Fame arrived fast and overwhelming, wrapped in newsprint and manhunt bulletins and public fascination. Clyde polished the badge one night in a cheap Louisiana motel, Bonnie watching him from the bed with quiet understanding of what it meant, what it represented. She never asked him to get rid of it. Fame is a trap you build yourself, one headline at a time. By early 1933, the Texas Rangers had brought in Frank Hamer, a legendary lawman with a fearsome reputation for never, ever giving up on a manhunt. Hamer was 50 years old, 6'3", had personally killed more than 50 men in the line of duty over a 30-year career. He studied the Barrow Gang's patterns methodically, interviewed dozens of witnesses, tracked their routes on maps spread across his kitchen table. That's when Sheriff Ted Hinton told him about the badge and what it represented. Clyde Barrow stole my badge back in 1926, Hinton explained during a meeting in Austin. Right after I slapped him at a gas station for mouthing off. He's been carrying it ever since, according to informants. Targets sheriffs specifically, goes out of his way to humiliate them whenever possible. Hamer listened carefully, made detailed notes in his personal journal, filed the psychological detail away for later use. It wasn't about justice for Hamer. It was purely about strategy and tactical advantage. If Clyde had an emotional weakness, a vulnerability rooted in past humiliation, Hamer would eventually exploit it without hesitation. In April 1933, the Barrow gang had a dangerously close call in Joplin, Missouri. Major shootout with local police, bullets tearing completely through their stolen car's doors and windows, but they escaped by sheer speed and reckless driving. Bonnie took shrapnel to her right leg, a serious wound that got infected and changed everything about their operations. She couldn't walk properly anymore, couldn't run fast when things went wrong during a job. Clyde checked his pocket that night, while Bonnie slept fitfully with fever, felt the badge still there, and for the first time since stealing it, wondered seriously if luck eventually ran out for everyone. They were slowing down, becoming vulnerable, easier to track and corner. Every weakness is a crack in the armor that eventually breaks wide open. Early 1934, and Frank Hamer was now working full-time exclusively on Bonnie and Clyde. Former Texas Ranger Captain Hamer had come out of retirement specifically for this hunt. He placed paid informants in small towns they were known to frequent, tracked their movements obsessively through stolen car reports filed across 5 states, built an increasingly detailed map of their habits and patterns. Clyde's paranoia grew proportionally with the pressure. He checked mirrors constantly, slept in the car with a Browning automatic rifle across his lap, never stayed in one place more than 3 or 4 hours maximum. The badge, once purely a symbol of rage and humiliation, had become something else entirely. A superstition, a good luck charm he absolutely could not function without. He started wearing it pinned inside his jacket, metal cold against his ribs with every breath. Meanwhile, Bonnie's poetry got published in national newspapers and magazines. The story of Bonnie and Clyde made them genuine folk heroes to some Americans, bloodthirsty monsters to others. The public split dramatically. Depression-era Americans saw them as modern Robin Hood figures, fighting corrupt banks and a system that had failed millions. Law enforcement and politicians saw cop killers who needed to be stopped permanently by any means necessary. Clyde and Bonnie couldn't walk into a diner or gas station without immediate recognition, without whispers and stares. Fame had trapped them far more effectively than any coordinated manhunt possibly could. They were too famous to hide successfully, too dangerous to surrender, too proud to stop and face what they'd done. Celebrity is the opposite of escape. It's a prison made of attention and recognition. April 1934. Clyde and Bonnie were hiding in rural Louisiana, exhausted and running desperately low on safe options. They made contact with the father of Henry Methvin, a gang member who'd been arrested 3 months earlier. The elder Methvin agreed to help them lie low, offered to meet them on Highway 154 near Gibbsland on May 23rd. What Clyde and Bonnie didn't know, couldn't have known. Methvin had already cut a deal with Frank Hamer. In exchange for leniency for his imprisoned son, he'd set up the ambush and betray them completely. Hamer got the tip through his network, confirmed the exact location with Methvin, set the date firmly. May 23, 1934, early morning. He assembled a team of 6 officers, positioned them strategically in bushes along the highway with clear lines of fire, and then waited patiently. That morning, Clyde woke early in the stolen Ford, parked on a back road, checked the badge in his jacket pocket out of habit, polished it absent-mindedly with his thumb. It had been exactly 8 years since the gas station slap. 8 years of carrying that piece of scratched metal everywhere he went, through dozens of robberies, multiple shootouts, narrow escapes, every single moment of his criminal life. He had absolutely no idea this was his final morning alive. Routine is what kills you in the end. May 23, 1934. Clyde and Bonnie woke up around 8 a.m. in the Ford V8, parked on a back road outside Gibbsland, Louisiana. Warm morning, birds singing, nothing unusual at all. The badge was in Clyde's jacket, same pocket, same position it had occupied for 8 years. They were driving to meet Methvin's father, just a routine meetup to discuss safe houses, nothing that raised any red flags or concerns. Bonnie ate a sandwich, Clyde smoked a cigarette, the morning stretching out lazy and deceptively peaceful. Meanwhile, on Highway 154, Frank Hamer and 5 other officers crouched motionless in bushes with rifles loaded and safeties off. They'd been positioned there since dawn, waiting in complete silence, watching the empty road. Hamer had spent exactly 102 days tracking the Barrow gang across multiple states. He knew their patterns intimately, their habits, their weak points, their escape routes. The plan was brutally simple. When the Ford slowed down to check on Methvin's truck, they'd open fire immediately. No warnings, no arrest attempts, no chances for escape. At 9:10 a.m., Clyde and Bonnie drove north on Highway 154. Windows down, country music on the radio, absolutely no idea what waited around the next curve. The end always looks exactly like every other morning. At 9:15 a.m., Henry Methvin's truck appeared on the side of Highway 154, positioned exactly where Hamer had ordered it. Clyde saw it from 100 yards away, recognized it immediately, slowed the Ford to check if everything was okay. That's when the officers opened fire without warning. 130 rounds in 16 seconds. Bullets shredded the Ford, shattered every window, tore through metal and flesh without distinction. Clyde died instantly, head snapping forward violently, hands still gripping the wheel. Bonnie died seconds later, body slumping against the passenger door. The shooting stopped. Silence settled heavy over the highway, broken only by hissing radiator steam and the overwhelming smell of gunpowder. Officers approached slowly, weapons still raised, unsure if the threat was truly neutralized. They found Clyde and Bonnie riddled with bullets, over 50 wounds each, bodies barely recognizable. And in Clyde's jacket pocket, completely soaked in blood, they found the badge. Scratched, tarnished, 8 years old, still there after everything. Sheriff Ted Hinton, one of the 6 shooters, recognized it immediately when they laid evidence on the hood. His badge, the one stolen in 1926 after he'd slapped a skinny kid at a gas station. In the end, the badge came back to the law. Bodies were displayed at a funeral home in Arcadia, Louisiana. 20,000 people showed up over 2 days to see Bonnie and Clyde laid out. Curiosity far stronger than decency or respect. Newspapers called them modern-day Robin Hoods, tragic lovers destroyed by a system that gave them no chance. But Sheriff Ted Hinton stood in that funeral home looking at the badge in an evidence bag, and he saw something completely different. He saw a 17-year-old kid he'd casually slapped at a gas station. A single moment of careless cruelty that spiraled into 8 years of violence and 13 dead officers. The badge was rust brown with dried blood, scratched from years in Clyde's pocket, worn smooth in places from constant handling. Hinton held it, turned it over slowly, felt the terrible weight of what that slap had created. Every monster starts as someone who got hurt. The badge eventually found its way to the Texas Ranger Museum in Waco, where it sits today behind protective glass. Scratched, faded, ordinary-looking to tourists who walk past without understanding. The small label reads, Clyde Barrow, 1926 to 1934. Clyde carried that badge for 8 years, from gas station humiliation to death on a Louisiana highway. Frank Hamer said later, in an interview that most newspapers didn't publish, he wanted to die with it. That's why it was in his pocket, not his glove box or hidden in his suitcase. His pocket, right against his heart. Bonnie's poetry survived. The badge survived. The slap that started everything, forgotten by everyone except the ones who were there that spring day in 1926. Humiliation doesn't fade. It transforms into something far more dangerous.